Every Saturday the light was different. A Hood Eloquence presentation. Part 1. The study of ordinary light. There is a particular kind of honesty in looking at people who do not know they are being seen. Candice Brown, sketchbook, undated. Chapter 1. The geometry of Saturday. Candice Brown had a theory about parks. Not the kind of theory that got written down in academic journals or spoken aloud in gallery spaces where people sipped wine with their pinkies hovering. It wasn't the kind of theory that required validation. It lived in her chest, just below the sternum, warm and certain the way only the things we teach ourselves tend to be. The theory was simple. A park on a Saturday told the truth. Not the curated truth of a wedding portrait or the frozen joy of a Christmas card. Not the truth people performed for their phones, angled and filtered until it looked like a life someone else was supposed to want. A park on a Saturday told the truth the way a worn shoe does, in the bend of the sole, in the way the heel had worn down just slightly to the left, in what that asymmetry said about the whole long story of a body moving through the world. Candice had been coming to Riverside Park for 4 years. She'd started in the autumn of her 24th year, when the city felt too loud and her apartment felt too small and her whole life felt like a sweater that had shrunk 2 sizes in the wash, technically still hers, but wrong in every direction. She'd sat on a bench with her sketchpad and her headphones and just looked. And something in the looking had settled her. Now it was mid-May, the grass gone electric with the kind of green that only showed up for about 3 weeks before the heat flattened it back to something more polite. The air smelled like cut clover and sunscreen and somebody's jerk chicken doing its patient, fragrant work 2 pavilions over. Candice had her headphones on Erykah Badu Today, Mama's Gun, the album that understood that a woman could hold grief and power in the same 2 hands, and she was angled on her usual bench, third from the east entrance. The one with the iron armrest on the left side that she'd come to think of as hers. Her sketchpad was open to a fresh page. She never sketched immediately. That was amateur thinking, the impulse to grab at the first interesting thing before you'd let the scene breathe. She watched first. Let her eyes rest on the middle distance, soft-focused, the way a photographer might wait for the light to shift before committing to an exposure. She was waiting for the park to forget she was there. It didn't take long. There. A woman in her 70s at the picnic table nearest the fountain, dividing a sandwich with a precision that suggested either a very long marriage or a profound indifference to her own hunger. There, 2 teenage boys performing elaborate indifference to each other while standing 3 feet apart. There, a father with an infant in a carrier strapped to his chest, bouncing slightly in place, the unconscious rhythm of a man who had already stopped thinking about it, the bounce now as natural as breathing. Candice's pencil moved. She worked in graphite mostly. Sometimes ink. She'd tried color and found it too insistent, too interested in making conclusions. Black and white left room for the viewer to finish the feeling. She was interested in the unfinished feeling. She was interested in what lived in the margins of a moment before meaning closed in around it. Her work had sold exactly twice in the traditional sense, once at a small group show in Hoboken, once through an Instagram DM from a woman in Atlanta who'd seen her page and wanted the sketch of the bus stop couple. Everything else lived in the stacks of finished pads under her drafting table, or in the 847 posts on at Candice_draws_it that she'd never quite been able to think of as a career even though the numbers said otherwise. She didn't do this for the numbers. She did it because the world was full of things that nobody was writing down correctly. He arrived at 11:47. She didn't know his name. She'd never spoken to him. But she had been watching him arrive at this park, this bench, this stretch of open Saturday for going on 2 years, and she knew the shape of his arrival the way you know the particular sound of a car you've been waiting for before it even turns the corner. First came the laugh. It preceded him by a full 20 feet, that deep, uninhibited barrel of a sound that made the pigeons near the fountain scatter and made the old men at the chess tables look up with something halfway between annoyance and envy. Then came the boys. 2 of them today. They were always different ages, but always the same energy. Absolute, shameless, gravitational. They orbited him the way small planets orbited something they'd decided was the center of the known universe. The smaller one couldn't be more than 6, was hanging off his left arm with both hands, feet dragging through the grass, shrieking with the particular joy of a child who has discovered that an adult will let them do this. The taller one, maybe 7, was running circles around them both, narrating something at the top of his lungs that Candice couldn't hear over her headphones, but which appeared to involve a dragon and a bicycle and possibly the president. The man himself was unhurried. That was the first thing she'd ever noticed about him. The unhurriedness. He moved through the park the way water moved through a wide river, purposeful but not rushed, occupying exactly as much space as he needed and no more. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, the kind of build that suggested he'd worked for it some time, but had now simply grown into it the way a tree grows into the shape its roots already knew it would take. He wore dark jeans and a white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he had a face that Candice had filled 3 sketchbook pages with over the course of 2 springs and 1 autumn. Not because he was beautiful, though he was. Because he was legible. In a world full of people working very hard to present an edited version of themselves to the ambient surveillance of existence, this man's face simply said what it meant. When he was tired, his face knew about it. When something the boys said delighted him, which was often, the delight was total, the kind that reached all the way up to the outer corners of his eyes and left temporary evidence there. When he was thinking, you could see the thinking move through him like weather across a flat landscape, unhurried and visible for miles. Candice had sketched him 43 times. She had counted, somewhat embarrassed by the count. She told herself it was because he was good source material. She told herself it was the quality of his interaction with the children that interested her, the unperformed love of it, the way he got down to their level without making a production of doing so. She told herself a lot of things. The smaller boy, the one who'd been hanging off the arm, had broken free now and was running toward the swings with the velocity of a child who has spotted his destiny. The taller one had stopped narrating and was pointing at something in the fountain, and the man was crouching down beside him to look at whatever it was, one large hand resting easily on the boy's shoulder. Candice's pencil was already moving. She pulled her headphones down around her neck, Badu going quiet mid-syllable, and let the ambient noise of the park wash over her. Better. You needed the sound when you were working from life. You needed to hear the whole texture of the moment. The man said something that made the boy throw his head back and laugh. Candice's pencil captured the angle of the boy's neck. The upward tilt of a face surrendering to joy. She was so thoroughly inside the work that she didn't notice when the smaller boy stopped running. Didn't notice when he walked back from the swings with the focused, contractual energy of a child who has decided something. Didn't notice until a voice said, from approximately 4 feet away, "Hey lady, you drawing Uncle Jack?" Candice looked up. The boy was 6 at most, brown as good earth, with the kind of eyes that appeared to be made of a slightly higher grade material than the rest of the world, large and dark and thoroughly unimpressed by anything you might try to use as a defense. "I'm drawing the park," Candice said. The boy looked at her sketchpad with the frank evaluative gaze of someone who had not yet learned to pretend politeness. "That's Uncle Jack," he said, pointing. You drew his face. There was really nothing to say to that. "He comes here a lot," Candice offered. "Every Saturday," the boy agreed, as if confirming a known fact. "We make him." He paused, with the particular weight of a child who is about to say something important. His girlfriend was bad to him. "Johnny." The voice came from behind Candice, and even though she had heard it only at a distance, only filtered through the ambient noise of the park, she knew exactly whose it was before she turned. And still she was not entirely prepared for what it was like up close. He was standing a respectful distance back, hands in his pockets, looking down at the boy with an expression that was attempting sternness and not quite getting there because the embarrassment kept surfacing through it. "I'm sorry," he said, and when his eyes came up to hers, the embarrassment was fully there now, warm and human and somehow more disarming than any composed expression would have been. "He's an ambassador for the unfiltered truth." "He really is," Candice said. Johnny, entirely unmoved by the concept of having done anything wrong, pointed at the sketchpad again. "She got your face right," he announced, to both of them. Jackson Dean looked at the sketchpad. Candice watched him look at it, watched the slight widening of his eyes, the fractional shift in the set of his jaw. Watched him see himself the way she had been seeing him, unhurried, legible, real. He stopped. Started again. "May I?" She handed him the pad. He turned through the last 3 pages slowly, carefully, like someone handling something that might mean more than they'd accounted for. When he looked up, the embarrassment had become something quieter. "How long have you been?" 2 years, roughly, Candice said. "Then, because honesty deserved honesty, you're a good subject. You don't perform." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm Jackson." Candice. Johnny, who had apparently decided that introductions were complete and adult conversation was beneath his interest, had turned and walked back toward the fountain. Jackson watched him go, then looked back at Candice. "Can I sit?" he asked. "Just for a few minutes. Earl's got the fountain situation handled." Candice moved her bag to make room on the bench. He sat, and the park kept doing its patient, unhurried work around them. Chapter 2. What he was recovering from. The story of Naomi Collins had been told so many times, in so many formats and platforms and group chat threads, that by the time Jackson had finished actually processing it, it had acquired the slightly flattened quality of legend. Here was what had happened. On the evening of November 14th, at the engagement party that his mother had organized at the Riverside Grill, a venue she had reserved 3 months in advance, a deposit she had paid herself as a gift, Tables she had decorated with ivory and gold because she'd asked Naomi twice about colors and Naomi had said ivory and gold. The woman Jackson Dean had been engaged to marry was discovered in a broom closet on the second floor with a waiter named Brendan. Discovered not by Jackson, by his Aunt Yvonne, who had been looking for the bathroom. What Aunt Yvonne had discovered, and what she had subsequently described to 3 of her sisters over the phone while Jackson sat in his car in the parking garage, was not a moment of weakness or a single error in judgment, but the enthusiastic evidence of what turned out to be a long-standing pattern. It turned out that Naomi Collins had, over the course of their 18-month engagement, been what Jackson's mother would only call accessible in a tone of voice that suggested the word was doing significant diplomatic work. The town, small enough to have a town, which Jackson had always considered a liability, had known, or suspected, or circulated it in the whisper economy of shared history and overlapping social circles, and had, collectively, not quite gotten around to saying anything to him. Jackson had sat with this fact for the first 2 weeks, had turned it over in his hands like a stone, examining it from different angles, had tried to locate within himself the devastation he suspected he was supposed to be feeling. He'd found something. He wouldn't call it nothing. There was the public humiliation of it, which was real and which sat in his chest with a particular dull weight every time he walked into a room where people already knew. There was the anger, hot and justified, at being lied to, at having the architecture of his next several years built on a false foundation. But the earthquake he'd expected, the one that should have leveled him, never came. And after long enough sitting with the absence of that earthquake, he'd arrived at the truth he hadn't been ready to say out loud. He hadn't been in love with Naomi Collins. He had been in love with the idea of a next chapter, with the relief of having arrived somewhere. He was 32 years old, and he ran a successful construction company, and his family asked questions at every gathering, and Naomi was beautiful and plausible and had seemed, when they met, like someone who matched the version of himself he was trying to inhabit. The problem was that version of himself had never quite fit right either. His brother Marcus had said this to him on the phone 3 days after the incident, with the blunt love of a man who has known you since you were 9, Jack. You spent 2 years trying to convince yourself she was enough. Be glad she saved you the paperwork. Jackson had laughed. Had been surprised by the laugh, its genuineness. And then Marcus's boys, Earl and Johnny, had started showing up on Saturday mornings because they couldn't deal with Uncle Jack being alone, which was what Earl had told their mother with the complete solemn sincerity of a 7-year-old who had decided something. So here he was, on a bench in Riverside Park, in the good warm air of a mid-May Saturday, sitting next to a woman with long black locks and a sketchpad and 43 drawings of his face. He was not, he realized, as okay as he'd thought he was. He was better than okay. So you freelance, he said. Not a question exactly, more an attempt at conversation that didn't feel like an interrogation. Technically. That's the word for it. He glanced at her. She was looking at the fountain where Johnny and Earl had now embarked on what appeared to be a very serious negotiation involving a stick and a piece of bark. What's the real word for it? Candice considered. It was one of those questions she'd been asked before and answered quickly, deflecting with a self-deprecating joke or a redirect. She wasn't sure why she didn't do that now. I make records, she said, of things that get forgotten. The way a person holds their coffee cup when they're thinking. The face a kid makes right before they decide to cry or decide not to. Old men in barbershops. 2 people sharing an umbrella who don't know each other but are leaning in without noticing. I draw them down so they don't disappear. Jackson was quiet for a moment. Like a documentarian. Like that. Without the camera. The camera changes things. Everything changes when you point a lens at it, Candice agreed. Pencils quieter. People stop knowing they're being watched faster. He was looking at her sideways now, and she was aware of it in the particular way you become aware of a heat source, not loudly, but in the body, in the small recalibration of your orientation. Have people complained? About being drawn without permission. Once. A man at a coffee shop. He wanted the sketch. Did you give it to him? No. It wasn't his. It was the moment's. Jackson considered this. And mine, he asked. Were those mine, the 43 drawings? She turned to look at him directly for the first time since he'd sat down. He had good eyes, she thought. The kind that had learned to wait. The drawings are mine, she said. What thereof is yours. You were just living your life. I was taking notes. Fair enough, he said. And then, carefully, I don't mind. For what it's worth. Earl appeared at Jackson's elbow, breathless. Uncle Jack. Johnny ate the bark. Jackson was off the bench before the sentence finished. Candice watched him go, watched him cross the grass in 4 long strides, crouch down to Johnny's level, examine the evidence with the calm of a man who had handled every possible crisis a 6-year-old could generate. She picked up her pencil. Page 44. Chapter 3, What the Sketchbook Held. Her apartment was on the 4th floor of a building in Prospect Heights that had been ugly in the 70s and had now come around through the full cycle to being charming again. The radiator knocked. The windows faced west, which was a gift in the evening. The walls were the particular off-white of landlord paint applied over history. Candice had covered them. Not chaotically, she had an archivist's instinct, despite the artistic persona people sometimes assumed meant she lived inside beautiful disorder. Her finished pieces were organized in labeled flat files under the drafting table. Her reference photos were sorted on the external hard drive by subject and year. Her current works in progress were pinned to the corkboard over the drafting table in a loose left-to-right sequence that tracked where she was in a piece. What covered the walls were the prints. 27 of them, ranging from small 4x4 to a piece she'd done 2 years ago of the old men outside the Dominican barbershop on Flatbush that was 20 inches wide and 30 tall, and had more detail per square inch than anything else she'd ever made. The prints were all black and white. All graphite or ink. All of them the specific work of someone trying to honor ordinary duration. She stood in front of the drafting table with the sketchpad from today open to page 44 and looked at what she'd done. Jackson Dean, crouched in the grass beside his nephew, examining the evidence of the bark situation with the focused calm of a man who took small problems seriously because small people were involved. She'd caught the angle of his back, the way his shoulders had gone soft, not slumped, but released, the tension he probably carried through the week set down here in this park on this Saturday. She'd caught Earl standing to the side with his arms crossed, already processing the lesson. She'd caught Johnny's face, which was a masterpiece of dignified embarrassment. She'd caught, in the negative space between Jackson's crouched form and the sky, something she didn't have a word for. Steadiness. That was close but not right. Solidity. Closer. The quality of a person who could be counted on. She set the pad down and opened her laptop and looked at her messages. Her friend Tamara had texted twice, the first asking if she was coming to the gallery thing on Thursday, the second asking why she never replied to messages in a timely human fashion. Her mother had called and left a voicemail that Candice knew without playing contained at least 2 questions about when she planned to get a real job and 1 observation about how talented she was that felt somehow like an accusation. There was a new inquiry in her art account's DMs. She opened it without particular expectation. It was from an account called jdean_builds. The profile photo showed a job site, something mid-construction, the steel skeleton of a building caught in afternoon light. The message read, "My name is Jackson Dean. I'm not sure if you remember me. We met at Riverside Park today, briefly, through my nephew Johnny and a piece of bark. I was wondering if you do commission work. I'm looking for a mural artist for a new building my company just completed. We have a lobby wall, 12 feet by 8, that I'd like to do something real with rather than something decorative. I saw your page and I think you might understand what I mean by that distinction. If you're open to it, I'd love to discuss. No pressure. J." Candice read it twice. Then she read it a third time, because there was something in the phrasing, something real rather than something decorative, that had landed squarely in the center of the thing she'd been trying to articulate about her own work for 4 years. She typed, "I understand the distinction completely. Let's talk." See. She hit send before she could think better of it. Then she looked at page 44 again. Outside, the evening was going soft and gold against her west-facing windows, and Candice Brown had the feeling, specific and cellular, like the first warmth of a fire you've just gotten close enough to really feel, that a Saturday had just changed. Part 2. The color of his attention. A mural is a promise. You make it to the wall, to the people who will live in front of it, and to yourself. Candice Brown. Chapter 4. The Lobby Wall. The building was in Red Hook, a converted warehouse, 5 stories of industrial bones dressed in modern glass and steel, the kind of thing that looked at home next to the water without pretending the water hadn't always been there. Jackson Dean's company, Dean Construction Group, had built it from the foundation up, and the pride in his voice when he talked about it was the unguarded kind, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. He met her at the door on Tuesday morning at 10. Candice had brought her reference notebook and her good measuring tape and the mental posture she adopted for professional consultations, attentive and expert, and doing a thorough job of not thinking about the fact that she'd gone through 3 outfit combinations before settling on the one she was wearing. He was wearing a gray Henley and work boots, and he had a hard hat tucked under his arm that he'd clearly grabbed out of habit and then decided wasn't needed for this particular meeting, and he said, "Good morning," when he saw her, and the morning immediately became better. She did not note this for the record. "This is it," he said, leading her through the lobby doors into the space. The lobby was high-ceilinged and flooded with the particular light that came through north-facing glass, cool, diffuse, honest light, the kind that painters coveted. The floors were polished concrete, warmed by the grain of reclaimed wood that ran along one wall. It smelled like new construction still, that clean chemical edge of recent possibility. And on the east wall, 12 feet high and 8 feet wide, was the smoothest expanse of prepared plaster she'd seen outside a museum. Candice stood in front of it for a long time. She was dimly aware of Jackson standing behind her and slightly to her right, not talking. Which was the right instinct. You didn't talk into the space between a painter and a blank wall. What were you thinking? She asked, still looking at the wall. I wasn't, he said. That's why I called you. She turned to look at him. Tell me about the building, she said. What happens here? Who comes in that door? And he did unhurriedly, the way he moved through the park, the way he seemed to move through everything. He told her about the mixed-use design, the small businesses on the ground floor, the residential units above. He told her about the food co-op that had signed a lease for the corner retail space, the family that had already moved into the third-floor unit, the kids who'd knocked on the door 3 times already to ask when the playground equipment was coming for the courtyard. He told her, carefully, that he'd grown up 4 blocks from here. That building on the corner, he said, nodding in a direction she understood was past the north-facing glass, used to be a rec center. When I was Earl's age 7, 8, that's where I learned to play chess. Where I fell off a stage during a Christmas program and my whole family talked about it for 15 years. He paused. I want the wall to be about that. Not this block specifically, but the idea that a place can hold people. That a building can be, not just a structure. That it can be continuous with the life that was already here. Candice looked at the wall again. She felt, in her chest, the familiar warm pressure of an idea that had already formed itself completely somewhere below the level of conscious thought, waiting only for the moment she turned her attention to it. I'm going to need to spend some time in the neighborhood, she said. I figured. I want to do it in graphite first, large sketches, work out the composition. Then transfer and paint. It'll take 6 weeks minimum. I'm not in a hurry, he said. She looked at him. People keep saying that to me and never meaning it, she said. He held her gaze with that unhurried steadiness she'd been drawing for 2 years. I mean it, he said simply. Candice believed him. That was the thing that surprised her most. He walked her through the neighborhood that afternoon. Not as a tour guide, he wasn't performing it. He walked her the way someone walks through their own history, pointing things out the way you point out a scar, matter-of-factly, with the familiarity of long relationship. That used to be the bodega where Mr. Alvarez let us run a tab for chips and called our mamas if we looked like we were up to something. That lot on the corner is where my brother Marcus proposed to his wife, because it was where they'd had their first argument and they wanted to fix the location in the record. That mural, he gestured to a faded piece on the side of a laundromat, was done by a kid who grew up 3 blocks over and now teaches art at a school in the Bronx. Candice took notes. Not on paper, she didn't pull out the notebook. She let her eyes do the recording and trusted that her hands would find it later. The light in late afternoon in Red Hook had a particular quality she hadn't encountered before, something about the proximity to the water and the angle of the sun, the way it came in low and amber and made the old brick look like it was lit from inside. She stopped twice to study specific patches of wall, specific slants of shadow. Jackson let her stop. Stood nearby, not hovering, not impatient. She noticed, without meaning to, the way his face went calm when he was just being still. Not empty, not the absence of expression, but the presence of a person comfortable in their own quiet. You like this neighborhood, she said, when they'd turned back toward the building. It made me, he said. That's the same thing and not the same thing. He thought about it. My mother would say I made me, he said. She's a very sovereign woman. But she'd also say she made me, and she'd be right. I think you can be made by a lot of things simultaneously. That's what the wall should say, Candice said, and she meant the mural, and she meant something larger. They stopped at the door of the building. The light was doing its amber work on his face. She wanted her pencil. Can I ask you something personal? She said. You've drawn me 44 times. You can ask. That made her smile. She felt it, the involuntary quality of it. The engagement, she said. Johnny told me something. I'm not asking about her. I'm asking if you're how you are. He looked at her for a moment. Then, honestly, better than I should be, probably. Which worried me for a while. Then I stopped worrying about it and just decided to believe it. Sounds like health to me, Candice said. Or delusion. Sometimes they look the same from the inside, she said. But usually you can tell by whether you're happy. Are you happy? He looked at the building. At the windows. At the late afternoon light doing its honest work. Getting there, he said. Today is a good day. She left him in front of his building and walked toward the subway with her notebook and her good measuring tape, and her mind was already at the wall, already in the composition, already finding the architecture of something real. Chapter 5. The first time he came to her studio. The studio was a fiction she maintained with her landlord, technically a 1-bedroom apartment, technically used for residential purposes, technically not a place where you could spend 18 hours working in controlled lighting on large-format graphite pieces that required you to move furniture against the walls to get the necessary distance. Technically. She'd invited Jackson to see the preliminary sketches for the mural on a Thursday evening, thinking it would be professional, thinking it would be efficient. thinking she would treat it exactly like the 3 other commission consultations she'd conducted over the years, which had involved showing the client work at a cafe or a neutral gallery space. She had not thought through what it would feel like to have him standing in her actual space. He knocked at 7 on the dot, which she noted because punctuality was a form of respect. She opened the door, and he was standing in the hallway in dark slacks and a navy shirt, and he was holding takeout containers. "I didn't know if you'd eaten," he said. "I brought Haitian food. The place on Atlantic. If you already ate, it keeps." Candice, who had absolutely not eaten because she'd been working since 4 in the afternoon and had forgotten that bodies required food, stepped back to let him in. He came into the apartment and took it in the way he took things in fully, without pretending not to be looking. She watched him look at the prints on the walls. Watched his eyes move slowly from piece to piece with the careful attention of someone who understood that he was in the presence of work that meant something. He stopped in front of the barbershop piece. Stayed there for a long moment. He turned to her. "This is exceptional, Candice." The use of her name in that tone, which was not a compliment tone, which was the tone of someone saying something they meant, did something to the air in the room. "Thank you," she said. "Come look at the wall sketches." She'd pinned the preliminary work to the corkboard and laid the larger composition sketch across the drafting table. He set the food on the kitchen counter without being told where to put it and came to look. She'd done 7 studies. The main composition was built on the idea of continuous time, figures from across the neighborhood's history layered over each other with varying opacity, not a montage, but a palimpsest, the way a place actually holds its past. A woman hanging laundry from a fire escape. Men loading ice from a block delivery truck, 1940s. A child in a doorway watching rain. A teenager with a basketball on his hip, standing in the particular stance of someone waiting for the next thing. A grandmother on a stoop. A couple walking hand in hand, anonymous, present tense. Jackson stood over the large sketch for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. "The woman with the laundry," he said. "The way you've done her arms." He indicated the raised angle of the figure, her head turned slightly, her posture carrying something that wasn't quite joy and wasn't quite labor, but was both simultaneously. "That's, my grandmother used to hang laundry." She hummed when she did it. "Specific songs." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Tell me about the songs," Candice said quietly. And he did. And she took notes. And the food went briefly cold on the counter and neither of them noticed for a while. They ate at the drafting table because there wasn't really a dining table, just the kitchen counter and 2 stools, and the drafting table with 1 chair and a spare stool she'd pulled from the closet. He ate with the particular appreciation of someone who knew good food and didn't perform the knowledge. He asked her about the mural timeline. She told him 6 weeks was her minimum, 8 was more realistic. "8 is fine," he said. "I'll need access to the lobby at odd hours sometimes," she said. "Early morning light, occasionally. I need to see how the north-facing glass behaves across the day. I'll give you a key." She looked at him. "To the building," he clarified, and there was the smallest curve at the corner of his mouth. "I know what you meant," she said. The curve became a smile. She looked away first. They talked about the neighborhood studies she'd been doing all week, the early mornings, the light off the water, the way the building's shadow moved across the courtyard between 10 and 2. She showed him the page-by-page documentation, the daily sketches, the series of notes in her cramped left-handed handwriting that covered the margins of every page. He read her notes. She found this disproportionately intimate, that he read them carefully, the way you read something that matters, not scanning but attending. "You write like you draw," he said. "What does that mean?" "Like you're trying to get the true shape of something." He handed the notebook back. "Like you won't settle for approximate." Candice set the notebook on the table. Outside her windows the city was doing its Thursday evening thing, the ambient score of a place that never fully went quiet. "What made you want to build things?" she asked. He thought about this honestly, which she'd come to recognize as his mode, not reaching for the prepared answer, but actually going back to find the real one. "I like problems that have correct solutions," he said. "Not just good solutions, correct ones. Where the math either works or it doesn't. Where the load either bears or it breaks. I work in the space between what exists and what should exist." He paused. "Though I suppose you do too." "I work in the space between what exists and what gets remembered," Candice said. "That might be the same thing," he said. She looked at him. There was a specific quality of attention he gave her when she spoke, not waiting to respond, not formulating his next statement while she finished hers, but genuinely listening, actually present in the words. She'd met very few people who did this. She'd drawn one of them 44 times over 2 years. "It might be," she agreed. The room was quiet for a moment. "I should let you work," he said, and began to collect the containers. "You don't have to. I want you to finish this mural," he said. "Which means I need you to have your evenings." He stood with the containers and looked at her. "But I'd like to bring dinner again. If that's acceptable." Candice considered the wall behind her drafting table. Considered the evening. Consider the very particular warmth of having someone in her space who understood how to be in it. Thursday works, she said. He smiled. It was the version of his smile she hadn't drawn yet, the private one, the unguarded one, the one that had nothing to do with the boys or the park but was just for this room and this moment. She would draw it later. From memory. Chapter 6. What Naomi Wanted. The first time Naomi Collins showed up at the building site was a Wednesday in early June, 3 weeks into the mural project. Candice was on the second rung of the scaffold she'd set up against the east wall, working the graphite transfer of the figure she privately called the grandmother. The lobby was quiet except for the ambient sound of the building, the low hum of HVAC, the distant percussion of the food co-op setting up on the ground floor, the specific acoustic quality of polished concrete. She heard the door before she heard the voice. Then the voice. Is Jackson here? Candice came down off the scaffold. The woman in the doorway was beautiful in the specific way that announced itself, professionally maintained, dressed with the precision of someone who understood the work involved in appearing not to try. She had the air of someone who had walked into every room she'd ever entered expecting to be the most important thing in it. He's not here, Candice said. This is a job site. Naomi's eyes traveled across the lobby, took in the scaffold, took in the drop cloth, took in Candice, paint-dusted jeans, old t-shirt, locks wrapped up under a bandana, and made an assessment that was visible in the small recalibration of her expression. And you are? The artist. A pause. He hired an artist for this? Her tone had the specific texture of a question that already contains its answer. He hired me, Candice said evenly, for the mural. Which is what I'm working on. Jackson's usually in the office by now if you want to reach him there. Naomi stepped further into the lobby, which was technically an invitation Candice hadn't extended. It's interesting, she said, looking at the wall. The transfer work was already visible, the outlines of the composition in their preliminary state, the scaffolding of something that wasn't yet what it would be. Candice, who knew what interesting meant in that tone, said nothing. Jackson always did like art, Naomi said. He's never really understood it, but he likes it. She turned. How did you meet him? Through the commission. This was true enough. Naomi looked at her for a beat longer than necessary. Well, she picked up her bag. Tell him I stopped by. I've been trying to reach him. We have unfinished business that he's been avoiding. I'll let him know, Candice said. Close the door on your way out. The door closed. Candice stood in the lobby and breathed through the particular irritation that came not from confrontation, but from having your work interrupted by someone who did not understand that interrupting someone's work was its own kind of violence. She climbed back up the scaffold. The grandmother's arms waited to be finished. She told Jackson that evening. She called him because it was relevant to the job site. That was the professional rationale she used when she pressed his name in her contacts, and she said, without drama, that a woman named Naomi had come by the building asking for him. There was a pause on his end that had nothing to do with a bad connection. She come in the building, he asked. Walked right in. I was on the scaffold. Another pause. She could hear him adjusting something, the shift of a chair, the kind of movement people make when they're realigning themselves. I'm sorry about that, he said. She doesn't, he stopped. She won't do it again. I'm not asking you to manage her, Candice said. I'm just giving you information. I know. I appreciate it. A beat. How's the grandmother coming? She smiled despite herself. Her arms are almost right, she said. I had to do 3 versions. I wanted to get the specific muscle of carrying something heavy while you're also going about your day. She always looked like that, he said. Like she was holding more than you could see. The line went quiet for a moment that wasn't empty. Candice. Yeah. I'm glad it's you, he said. Doing this. I'm glad I sent that message. She stood in her studio with her phone against her ear and felt the warmth of that settle in her chest the way good work felt when it was finally right. Thursday, she said. Thursday, he confirmed. She hung up and looked at the sketches pinned to her wall and thought about arms that carried invisible weight, about the specific architecture of a person who keeps going, and she picked up her pencil and worked until midnight. Part 3. What gets built. Some things take 6 weeks. Some things take 2 years. The time it takes is not the measure of the work. CB. Chapter 7. Thursday evenings. It became a thing without anyone deciding it would be a thing. Thursday evenings. Haitian food or Thai food or once, memorably, tamales from the woman who sold them outside the Atlantic Avenue subway stop, hot, wrapped in foil, perfect. The drafting table as a dining table. The work always present, the mural studies pinned to the wall or spread across the floor, never put away because Candice didn't put her work away when she was in the middle of it and she'd stopped pretending she would. Jackson never asked her to. What she noticed early in June was that he'd started bringing things. Not aggressively, not performing the gesture. The second Thursday it was coffee from a place near his office, black-owned, he mentioned, because he thought she should know about it. The third Thursday it was a flat of good drawing paper because she'd mentioned offhandedly that she was running low on her preferred weight and he'd apparently noted this and found the brand. The fourth Thursday, he'd brought his laptop because there was a reference photo archive at the Brooklyn Historical Society he'd gotten access to and wanted to show her. She had sat next to him at the drafting table and looked at photographs from 1940s Red Hook and felt the specific pleasure of research, not just for the mural, but for the quality of shared attention. He looked at the photos with the same careful respect she did. He asked questions about what she was looking for. He didn't tell her what he saw. He let her see it. They were 2 weeks from the Saturday in the park, she'd realized. In 2 weeks, she had sat next to this man for probably 15 hours. She knew how he took his coffee, black, no sweetener, but he always sweetened hers without asking because she'd done it once in front of him. She knew he'd been in the trade since he was 16, had gotten his contractor's license at 22, had started Dean Construction Group with a borrowed $50,000 and a single residential project in Canarsie. She knew he still called his mother every Sunday and that his brother Marcus was his closest friend and that the boys, Earl and Johnny, called him Uncle Jack with the reverence and comfort of people who had always known they were loved. She knew he'd been watching her in the park too. He'd told her this on the third Thursday, with a kind of deliberate honesty that had made her set her fork down. Not the way you were watching me, he'd said. You were working. I was just noticing. Every time I looked up, you were there. I told myself I was going to speak to you for about 6 months before Johnny handled it for me. What stopped you? She'd asked. A pause. I was engaged, he'd said. Then, that should have stopped me. But honestly, I think I was also I kept telling myself I'd speak to you when I had something worth saying. And now you do? He'd looked at her. Directly, unhurried. I'm working on it, he'd said. She'd picked up her fork. And changed the subject. And spent the rest of the evening aware of him in the way that suggested the subject hadn't really changed at all. Earl and Johnny began appearing on Saturdays with a new category of intelligence. This was not subtle. The Saturday after the first Thursday dinner, Earl had arrived at their usual bench. Jackson had told him which one, she surmised, with the solemn purposefulness of a 7-year-old carrying classified documents. Uncle Jack says you draw him the best, Earl announced. Does he? Candice said. He says you make him look like how he actually is. Candice thought about the 44 drawings. About the particular quality of attention she brought to them. About the fact that she'd known, somewhere below conscious thought, that she wasn't just making records. That's the goal, she said. Earl considered this. Then sat down next to her on the bench with the air of someone who has decided to enter a mentorship. Can you teach me to draw? He asked. I can, she said. But you have to be patient. Drawing is mostly looking. I'm good at looking, Earl said firmly. Johnny appeared from the direction of the fountain, holding a rock. This is for you, he said, handing it to Candice. It was a small, smooth piece of quartz, white and slightly pink, the kind of thing rivers made perfect. Thank you, she said, and meant it. Uncle Jack said you collect things, Johnny said. I collect moments, Candice said. But this is better. This is real. Johnny considered the distinction, found it acceptable, and sat down on her other side. Jackson arrived 3 minutes later, stopped when he saw the configuration, Candice on the bench, one nephew on each side, Earl apparently already sketching with a borrowed pencil, and stood there with an expression she hadn't drawn yet, but immediately needed to. She reached for her pad. He started walking toward them. 45. Chapter 8. The things we don't say before we say them. The mural was in its 4th week when the composition fully revealed itself to her. This was how it always worked with her larger pieces. The sketch might plan the architecture, the transfer might lay the bones, but there was always a moment when the thing being made showed her what it actually was. When she stopped composing and started listening. It happened on a morning in mid-June, 6:30 a.m., the lobby quiet, the north-facing light coming in at its most honest. She was on the upper level of the scaffold, working the figure she called the boy at the door, a child of about 8 standing in a half-open doorway, not entering or leaving, suspended in the specific temporal space of someone about to decide. She'd been working him for 3 sessions and something had been wrong in a way she couldn't name. Then, in the 6:30 light, she saw it. He wasn't looking at the street. He was looking back into the room. She wiped the existing line with her cloth and reoriented his gaze, and the figure immediately became true, became the specific thing she'd been trying to make it, became the whole argument of the mural in miniature. Not the story of leaving, but the story of what holds you, what you look back at, what you carry forward in your chest even when you walk out the door. She sat on the scaffold in the good morning light and felt the satisfaction of a correct solution, which was the closest thing she had to what Jackson had described about building, the specific quality of a thing that worked. She was still sitting there, cross-legged on the platform 20 minutes later, looking at the whole composition from the vantage point of someone who'd been inside it for weeks and could finally see its shape, when she heard the lobby door. Jackson came in with coffee. Early, she said. I was already up, he said. Figured. He came to stand at the base of the scaffold and looked up at the wall. She watched him look at it. He was quiet for a long time. The boy, he said finally. You changed his eyes. He was looking the wrong direction. No, Jackson said. He was. He tilted his head. He looks like someone who knows what he's leaving behind. That's what I wanted, she said. He handed her coffee up to her on the scaffold. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, brief, ordinary, the kind of contact that should have been nothing. Candice was aware of it in every nerve ending in her hand. Come down, he said. I want to stand back here and look at the whole thing with you. She came down from the scaffold and they stood together at the back of the lobby, far enough to take in the full width of the wall. The morning light was on it now, the cool diffuse north-facing light she'd been waiting for all week, and the whole composition lived in it. She felt him beside her. Not touching, not even close to touching, but present in the way that had its own quality of warmth. It's extraordinary, he said quietly. Candice. This is. He stopped. It's not finished, she said. I know. He didn't look away from the wall. I mean the whole thing. All of it. A pause. You see things other people don't know they're showing. She looked at the wall she'd been making for 4 weeks. At the accumulated looking of 4 years of Saturdays. At all the accumulated evidence of a person who had spent her entire working life trying to honor what existed by seeing it completely. Jackson, she said. Yeah. She turned to look at him. He turned at the same moment. They were closer than she'd registered, not dramatically, but enough. Close enough that she could see the morning in the lines of his face, the early tiredness of someone already several hours into his day, the warmth he didn't bother to modulate. I need to tell you something, she said. Okay. I drew you 44 times before I knew your name. And I knew, when I was doing it, that it wasn't just about the composition. She said it evenly, the way you say something true when you've decided it needs to be said. I think you should know that. He looked at her for a long moment. Long enough that she felt the weight of it without the discomfort, which was its own kind of answer. I've been wanting to say something, he said. For a while. He exhaled. I didn't want to make it complicated. The project. Your work. I'm a professional, Candice said. I know you are. I'll finish the mural either way. I know that too. He looked at her with the expression she'd drawn from memory, the private one, the unguarded one. I've been watching you from a distance for 2 years, and it turns out being close to you is better. Something in her chest shifted. That's the thing worth saying, she said softly. He moved first, not dramatically, not with the weight of someone making a declaration. Just closed the small distance between them and put one hand very gently along her jaw, and tilted her face up slightly, and kissed her in the morning light in the lobby of the building he'd built 4 blocks from where he grew up. It was the kind of kiss that knew what it was. That was patient with itself. That said, I've been paying attention and I intend to keep paying attention, and there is no hurry here because I plan for this to last. When they stepped back, both of them were quiet for a moment. Thursday, he said. Thursday, she confirmed. She climbed back up the scaffold. He stayed for an hour, watching her work, and neither of them said anything else for a while, and the light moved across the wall, and the morning opened. Chapter 9. The Table of His Family. Marcus Walker's house in Crown Heights was the kind of house that had been loved so thoroughly it had become structural, not just 4 walls and a roof, but a living argument for gathering, for the specific noise of people who knew each other well enough to disagree loudly and laugh louder. Candice had been in the car with Jackson for 11 minutes when he said, "My sister-in-law is going to ask you approximately 40 questions. She's not interrogating you, she genuinely wants to know." How many questions? 40 was an estimate. Could be more. Okay, my mother's going to be quieter. Quiet is good. Not with her, he said. With her, quiet means she's decided something and is waiting to confirm it. Candice looked at him. What does she decide? He merged onto the parkway with the unhurried efficiency of someone who'd driven this route thousands of times. Something happened with Naomi at the beginning, he said. My mother, she was polite. She did everything right. But she was quiet from the very first dinner. I should have paid more attention to that. A beat. And now? He glanced at her. The afternoon light through the windshield was on his face. She asked me twice this week when you were coming to dinner, he said. She's never asked about someone twice. Candice absorbed this. The house was on a tree-lined block, a brownstone with flower boxes in the window and Earl and Johnny visible from half a block away, sitting on the stoop with the expressions of people who had been waiting and would not pretend otherwise. They got out of the car and Johnny was off the stoop before they'd made it 3 steps. She's here, he announced, to no one in particular and everyone in earshot. Earl descended with more dignity. Hi, Candice, he said. Hi, Earl. She'd brought him the good drawing paper, the same weight she used, a full pad of it. She handed it to him. His face did something complex that resolved into the controlled joy of a 7-year-old who understands that some gifts are serious. Thank you, he said formally. Inside, the house smelled like oxtail and something baking and the particular wood-and-thyme smell of a place people had lived in for decades. The sound was immediate, a woman's voice from the kitchen asking if that was Jackson's car, another voice answering, laughter, the clatter of something being set on a counter. Jackson's sister-in-law Diane appeared from the kitchen doorway and was immediately everything Candice had expected and then more: tall, warm, with the focused energy of a woman running 4 things simultaneously and finding it not just manageable but genuinely enjoyable. She had Johnny's eyes. "Oh good," she said, in the tone of someone completing a sentence she'd started internally. Come in, come in. I'm Diane. I have so many questions." Jackson, from behind Candice, made a sound that was not quite "I told you so." Marcus came out of the back room and greeted his brother with the particular physical ease of 2 people who had grown up sharing space. He shook Candice's hand and looked at her with the careful warmth of someone who loves the person she was with and wanted to verify that his love was justified. "He talks about your work," Marcus said. "The mural. He talks about it the way he talks about his best projects." "I'll take that," Candice said. "You should," Marcus said. "He doesn't give it lightly." The kitchen opened onto the backyard through a sliding glass door, and the dinner table was set half inside and half on the back porch in the way people did in summer, the boundary between inside and outside made hospitable. Jackson's mother was already at the table. Beverly Dean was 72 and had the kind of face that Candice's hands immediately wanted to draw, not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because it was fully inhabited. Every experience of 72 years was present in it, not erased, but integrated, the way sediment becomes rock. She looked at Candice with those clear, slow eyes. "Sit near me," she said. Not an instruction exactly. More an indication of preference. Candice sat near her. Diane was already asking the first of her questions. Marcus was already redirecting his brother into an argument about a basketball game. Earl and Johnny were already doing something with the drawing pad that Candice would want to see later. Beverly Dean folded her hands on the table and looked at Candice with the specific patience of a woman who had made up her mind and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. "Jackson says you make things that tell the truth," she said. "I try," Candice said. "Most people are afraid of the truth in a picture," Beverly said. "They want it flattered. They want it corrected." She tilted her head. "What about you? Are you afraid of your own truth?" It was the kind of question that had no polite deflection available. "Sometimes," Candice said. "But I try to draw it anyway." Beverly Dean looked at her for one more long moment. Then she unfolded her hands and picked up the bread basket and held it toward Candice. "Eat," she said. "You're too thin." "Jackson, she's too thin." "Mama, I'm making an observation." Candice accepted the bread. Next to her, she felt Jackson's knee brush hers under the table. She didn't move away. He didn't either. The dinner went on, warm and loud and full of the specific nourishment of a table where people meant well. Diane asked 26 questions. Candice answered all of them. Marcus and Jackson's argument migrated from basketball to a construction dispute to a childhood incident involving a bicycle and a storm drain that made everyone laugh with the fullness of a story told so many times it had become mythology. Earl drew the backyard, focused and serious, with a new good paper. Johnny fell asleep in his chair before dessert. Beverly Dean said nothing else of substance to Candice the whole evening. Just, when they were leaving, she took Candice's hand in both of hers and held it for a moment. It was the answer to a question neither of them had asked aloud. Part 4. What the heart knows before the mind gives permission. Desire is patient. It does not demand. It waits in the body like a held note until the room is ready for the sound. CB Sketchbook. Chapter 10. The Weight of a Room at Night. It was a Tuesday in late June, and the mural was 5 weeks in, and Candice had been at the lobby wall since 8 in the morning, and had lost track of time the way you did when the work was going exactly right, when every mark was finding its place without the ordinary resistance of a piece in the wrong direction. She came down from the scaffold at 7:15 in the evening and turned around and looked at the whole wall in the building's interior lights, different from morning light, warmer and more directed, the figures gaining a different quality of shadow. She'd been here before. Not this building, this feeling. The precipice feeling. The 5-week mark of a large piece, when you could see both the beginning and the end from where you stood, when the original intention and the actual work had diverged just enough to become something truer than what you'd planned. She was looking at the wall with her arms crossed and her locks down from the bandana, thinking about the final figure she hadn't placed yet, the one that would anchor the foreground, present tense, the figure that would look back at the viewer without apology. When she heard Jackson's key in the lobby door. This was not unusual. He stopped by 3 or 4 times a week now. They'd negotiated a comfortable choreography of it. He checked in on the building, she was here working, they had coffee or a conversation or sometimes just occupied the same space in easy parallel, which was its own kind of intimacy. He came in and stopped when he saw her standing back looking at the wall. "Sorry, I can come back." "Stay," she said, without turning around. "Come tell me what you see." He came to stand beside her. Closer than the professional distance of their first weeks. She was aware of him with the full-body awareness she'd stopped pretending was just architectural interest. He looked at the wall for a long time. "There's something missing," he said finally. In the foreground, there's a space. Something should live there that doesn't yet. She turned to look at him. You see that, she said. Not a question. It's like when a building is almost complete, but there's a load-bearing element not yet installed, he said. You can feel the gap in the structure. That's exactly it, she said. They were looking at each other now rather than the wall. 5 weeks of Thursday evenings and Saturday mornings and building key proximity and the particular accumulated intimacy of two people learning each other in full view of their own work. Jackson reached up and tucked a single lock behind her ear. His fingers were warm, deliberate, the touch of someone who has thought carefully about whether they have the right to do this and decided they do. Can I take you somewhere? He said. Not for the mural. Just somewhere. Where? She asked. Red Hook waterfront. I want to show you something. She looked at the wall. At the missing figure. At the precipice feeling of a work 5/6 complete. Give me 10 minutes to clean up, she said. The waterfront in late June at 8 in the evening was the city being honest. The harbor opened out before them, the lights of the bridges and the far shore laid across the black water like something a careful hand had placed. The air was salt and heat and the specific quality of summer in New York, which was too much of everything and exactly right for that reason. He walked her to the end of a pier she hadn't known was there. It was old, the kind of structure that predated the borough's current incarnation, that remembered when Red Hook was working waterfront and not gallery spaces and artisanal coffee. The wood was weathered silver. The water moved dark and purposeful beneath it. I used to come here when I was building out the calculations for the Dean building, he said. When I couldn't sleep. I'd come here and look at the water and think about load and tension. A pause. It always helped. Things make more sense near water, Candice said. This city makes more sense near water, he agreed. It remembers what it is. They stood side by side. The harbor lights moved on the water. Behind them the city made its patient and unending sound. Jackson turned to her. In the waterfront light, silver and ambient, the honest light of a city not trying to perform anything, his face had the quality she'd been trying to capture for 44 drawings. The particular legibility of someone who had earned their own face. Who had let their life touch them without closing against it. I want to say something carefully, he said. Because I want to get it right. She waited. What happened with Naomi, the ending of it is not the beginning of this. I'm not using this to feel better about that. He held her gaze. I've been paying attention to you since before any of that became what it became. Before I admitted to myself that my engagement was a version of a life I'd settled for. He paused. You are not a rebound, Candice. You are not a consolation. You are the thing I was working toward before I knew I was working toward it. The harbor moved. The city breathed. Candice looked at him for a long moment, looked at him the way she looked at the park, the way she looked at the wall, with the full unhurried attention of someone who doesn't need to simplify what they're seeing. I know, she said. I can tell the difference. He reached for her hand. She gave it. They stood at the end of the old pier with the harbor opening out before them and the city at their backs, and she thought, this is the kind of moment that doesn't need to be drawn. The kind that lives only in the body. In the warmth of a hand that has chosen to hold yours. In the specific quality of an evening that will be, in the long run, the kind of evening you count as one of the ones that mattered. She leaned in slightly. He put his arm around her, and she settled against his side, and they stayed there while the water moved and the light did its patient silver work. Chapter 11. What happens when the city goes quiet? It was 3 weeks later, and the mural was complete. She'd known when she placed the final figure, had stood back at 7 in the morning with a coffee he'd left on the scaffold platform for her, and looked at the whole 12 by 8 feet, and felt the specific satisfaction of a thing that was done, truly done. Not unfinished, but complete. The final figure was a woman. Present tense. Facing the viewer. Not performing happiness, simply existing in the fullness of her own presence, in a body she'd inhabited for all of her years. Her locks were down. Her hands were paint-stained. She was looking back at you with the direct, unhurried gaze of someone who had decided to be seen. Candice had not planned this figure. She'd understood, when the figure appeared, what it meant. Jackson saw it the morning of the official completion. She'd asked him to come at 7, had told him she wanted him to see it in the morning light before anyone else did. He came in with coffee, handed her hers, and stood at the back of the lobby and looked at the whole wall for a long time without speaking. When he turned to her, his eyes were full of something she recognized as the specific emotion of being completely known. That's you, he said. It's the building, she said. It needed a present tense anchor. Candice. Yeah, that's you, he said again, and the way he said it was not an observation but something else. Something that understood the decision she'd made in putting herself there. On the wall. In the permanent record of a place that would hold people. She nodded. He crossed the lobby and kissed her forehead. Held it there for a moment, his hands on either side of her face, the coffee getting cold on the scaffold behind them. I want to commission another one, he said. For the house. Smaller, something for a wall in the study that I look at every day. She leaned back to look at him. What do you want for the study? His hands were still on her face, warm and unhurried. "I want what you see," he said. "Whatever that is. I trust it." She put her hands over his. Outside the north-facing glass, the morning was fully open. The food co-op was arriving with their first delivery. 2 kids from the residential units were cutting across the courtyard toward school. The city was doing its patient and continuous thing. Candice Brown looked at the man holding her face in his hands in the lobby of the building he'd built 4 blocks from where he grew up, in the morning light of a completed thing, and felt the specific fullness of a life that was becoming exactly what it should be. "Come to dinner tonight," she said. "My place. I'll cook." His eyes did the thing, the complete version of it, reaching all the way to the corners. "You cook," he said. "I do many things you don't know about yet," she said. He laughed, the barrel of sound version, the park version, the version that had preceded him by 20 feet for 2 years across the grass. She had never been so glad to be in the path of it. Her apartment that evening was different, not the space, but the quality of light in it, the particular aliveness a space takes on when it is about to be fully inhabited for the first time. She'd made jerk salmon and rice, and there were candles on the drafting table, and she'd taken down some of the pinned work studies to make the walls breathe, and she'd put on music, Cleo's Soul Tonight, who understood that a woman could be tender and decided simultaneously. He arrived at 7 with wine he'd clearly asked someone about, not performing knowledge, but having done the work of finding the right thing. They ate at the drafting table with their knees touching and the candles burning down and the music doing its quiet, patient work in the background. They talked about the building, about the gallery show his mother had already told her sister about Earl's drawing, which was developing a remarkable precision for a 7-year-old, about Johnny's current conviction that he was going to be a marine biologist. They talked about her mother, who called every Sunday with the same questions wearing different clothes. "Tell her about the building," Jackson said. "Show her the photos. Mothers understand buildings." "My mother understands job security," Candice said. "She'll ask who hired me and whether there's more work. Tell her there's more work." She looked at him across the small table with the candles between them. "Is there?" she asked. He held her gaze. "Yeah," he said quietly. "There is." She reached across the table and took his hand. He turned it over and held hers properly, with intention. The music shifted, something slower, something built on the low end of a piano and a voice that knew about patience. Jackson stood. Not abruptly, with that unhurriedness she had been studying for 2 years. He came around the small table and held his hand out to her with a formality that was also warmth. She took it. They moved in the small space between the drafting table and the window, not dancing exactly, more standing together in the dark with the city's light coming through the west-facing windows and the music holding them in its measure. His hand was warm at the small of her back. Her head was at the level of his collarbone. She could feel the steady work of his breathing. He pressed a kiss into her hair. Her locks. She lifted her face. The kiss this time was different from the lobby. That one had been a beginning, the declaration of something. This one was deeper, more certain of itself. The kiss of 2 people who had been moving toward each other across 2 years and multiple Saturdays and 44 drawings, and had now arrived at the center of the thing and found it to be exactly what they'd been walking toward. His arms came around her, and she was pressed against his chest, and she could feel his heartbeat, steady, unhurried, telling the truth. She put both hands against his chest and looked up at him. His face in the candlelight. Her face reflected in his eyes. "Stay," she said. He looked at her with the private expression, the unguarded one. "Yeah," he said. The music played. The candles burned. The city outside went on doing what cities do, which is continue, which is hold everyone inside it at once, which is witness, in the dark, the specific and ordinary miracle of 2 people choosing each other. She took his hand and led him away from the window, and the night opened around them, warm and complete, the way a thing feels when it was always going to happen and finally has. She would not draw this. Some things lived only in the body, in the warmth of a hand, in the specific weight of being held by someone who had been paying attention long enough to know exactly how. She kept it there, in the one archive no one else could access. Part 5. The people who come after. Some things cannot be interfered with. The only response to that is more of the thing. Beverly Dean. Chapter 12. What Naomi Did. Naomi Collins was not a villain. Candice had thought about this carefully, the way she thought about subjects, not to excuse the behavior, but to understand the shape of it. Because behavior had shape, like everything else. And the shape of Naomi's behavior was not malice. It was the more comprehensible and more painful thing. It was the architecture of a person who had not understood what they had until they no longer had it. Not Jackson specifically. Naomi had never quite seen Jackson, which was, Candice suspected, the root of all of it. She had seen what he represented, stability, success, a version of a future that other people recognized as good. She had spent the relationship treating its contents as fixed while treating herself as the variable. And now the fixed thing had moved and she was recalibrating. This did not make the next few weeks simpler. She appeared at the building again on a Thursday morning in July, 3 weeks after the mural's completion. The lobby was open to the public now, the food co-op drawing its first regulars, the residential tenants coming and going, a few small businesses having their first meetings in the ground floor conference room. And Naomi, in a white dress that had been chosen, standing in front of the mural with her phone out taking photographs. Candice was there with her final documentation kit, photographing the completed piece from multiple angles for her portfolio, a task she'd been doing methodically since 8 a.m. They saw each other at the same time. Naomi's expression went through several things quickly before settling on pleasant. "You finished it," she said. "I did," Candice said. Naomi looked at the wall. At the final figure. A pause. "Is that supposed to be you?" "It's the present tense of the building," Candice said. "Can I ask what you're doing here?" Naomi put her phone away with the deliberate motion of someone reorienting. "I came to see Jackson," she said. "I've been trying to reach him." "About?" The question was not hostile. It was simply a question. Naomi looked at her with the specific assessment of a woman deciding how honest to be. "I made a mistake," she said finally. "More than one. I'm trying to have a conversation." Candice looked at her directly, without the soft focus of social ease. Looked at her the way she looked at the park. At what was actually there rather than what was presented. What she saw was a woman who was genuinely unhappy. Who had made a series of choices that had been, in her own accounting, supposed to be low stakes and had discovered that nothing is low stakes. Who had, somewhere in the past several months, understood the difference between being wanted and being seen. Candice understood this. She did not need it to become her problem. "I can't speak for Jackson," she said. "If you want to reach him, reach him. But I'd ask you to do it through his office and not through spaces where his name is on the door." Naomi looked at her. "Are you too?" "That's between us," Candice said. Not unkindly. Clearly. A moment. Then Naomi picked up her bag. "It's good work," she said, gesturing at the mural. The wall. And then, with the particular quality of something reluctantly genuine, "You see him. In the boy at the door. That's Jackson. He doesn't know he's always about to decide something." She walked out. Candice stood in the lobby and breathed. Then she turned back to the wall and took the next photograph. She told Jackson that evening. He was quiet for a moment that held more than its duration. "I'll call her," he said. "We need to have the conversation we should have had 6 months ago." Clean ending. "You don't owe me that," Candice said. "You don't have to manage your past on my behalf." "I know." He reached across the counter and tucked a lock behind her ear, his gesture now, established in the 3 weeks since the pier. "I'm doing it because I want the record to be correct. No loose ends. No ambiguity." He looked at her. "I want to be available to you." "Not almost available." She looked at him. "Available," she repeated softly. "All the way available," he said. "In the way that means something." She covered his hand with hers. The kitchen was warm. The city was doing its evening thing. Somewhere in Crown Heights, Earl was doing his homework and Johnny was probably attempting something questionable, and Beverly Dean was watching her shows and knowing things without being told. "Okay," Candice said. "Okay," he said. He called Naomi the next morning. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. He told Candice afterward that it had been, largely, what he'd expected, not dramatic, not anguished, the ending of something that had been ending for longer than either of them had acknowledged. Naomi had cried, briefly. He had been honest, completely. He had wished her well and meant it. When he told her this, Candice thought, this is what a person with integrity looks like in practice. Not in the grand gesture, but in the 20-minute phone call that nobody else will know about, that makes no one a hero and everyone more free. She picked up her pencil. She drew him from memory again. 46. Chapter 13. What Beverly Knew. It was Diane who called Candice first, on a Tuesday in early August, to say that Beverly Dean had apparently been making some inquiries. "What kind of inquiries?" Candice asked. "She asked the gallery on Fulton Street if they carried your work," Diane said. "She asked her neighbor Sandra, who apparently is somehow tangentially connected to the Brooklyn arts community. Don't ask me how Sandra is connected to anything. Sandra is connected to everything, whether you had a show coming up." A pause. "She also asked me," Diane said, "whether I thought you were good for him. Not whether you were nice, not whether he liked you. Whether you were good for him." "What did you say?" Candice asked. "I said I thought you were the best thing to happen to him since he figured out he was good at building things," Diane said. "Which is the truth." Candice sat with this for a moment. "The gallery thing," she said. "Did she?" "She bought a print," Diane said. "The barbershop piece. She's having it framed." Candice put the phone down and sat at her drafting table and felt something warm and large and patient settle in her chest. It was not unlike the feeling of a completed mural. The feeling of a thing exactly in its right place. She went to Beverly's on a Sunday. Jackson drove her. He didn't know about the print, she hadn't told him, and when Beverly opened the door and they came in and Candice saw the barbershop piece framed and hanging on the wall of the front room, she stopped walking. Jackson stopped beside her and looked at the print and looked at his mother. Beverly Dean stood in the doorway to the kitchen with her arms crossed and the expression of a woman who has done exactly what she intended to do. "I know, good work," she said simply. Candice crossed the room and hugged her, without ceremony, without the tentative quality of a new relationship feeling out its limits. Fully. Beverly Dean held her back with the strength of a woman who had been waiting for the right person to receive it. Over Beverly's shoulder, Candice could see Jackson standing by the door with his hands in his pockets and his face doing the complete version of itself, the warmth that reached all the way to the corners, the private expression made briefly public. She would draw this. From memory. 47. Chapter 14. The Study. His house was in Bed-Stuy, a single-family brownstone he'd renovated himself over the course of 3 years, which meant it was excellent and also that you could see, in certain design choices, the specific opinions of a man building the place he wanted to live in for a long time. The kitchen was large. The study had a north-facing window. The bookshelves were built into the wall rather than standing against it. The bedroom had a clawfoot tub in the adjacent bathroom, which had been added to a floor plan that architecturally had no business accommodating a clawfoot tub, but which accommodated it beautifully because he'd found a way. She had come to know the house the way she came to know the neighborhood of a mural project, walking through it slowly, letting it tell her what it was. The study was her favorite. It was where he worked in the evenings when he didn't go to the office, the desk with the plans spread across it, the reference books, the old drafting tools from his grandfather that he kept in a brass cup but didn't use. The north-facing window that turned the room into a specific quality of light at different times of day. The chair by the window where he sat when he was thinking. She'd spent 3 weeks on preliminary sketches for the study mural. He'd left her alone with it, coming in only to bring coffee or to sit in the chair by the window working on his own things while she sketched. The comfortable parallel of two people who had found a way to share space without needing it to be anything other than what it was. The composition she'd arrived at was smaller than the lobby. This was for him, not for a building, and more intimate. A single continuous image rather than the layered palimpsest of the Red Hook piece. 2 hands. That was the whole thing. 2 hands in the specific geometry of reaching toward each other across a white expanse that was at once a piece of paper and a distance and a decision and a prayer. Not his hands. Not her hands. The abstracted hands of the gesture itself. She painted it over 2 weekends while he was with the boys, and when it was done she texted him one word, "Come." He came home. She heard the door. His footsteps in the hall. He pushed the study door open and stood in the doorway and looked at the wall behind his desk. She watched him look at it. His hands were loose at his sides. His face was the face she'd been drawing for 2 years and loving for half of one, and it was doing the complete thing it did when it was moved by something it hadn't expected to be moved by. He turned to her. "That's what you see," he said. "When you look at us." "That's what I see," she said. He crossed the room in 3 strides and his arms came around her, and he held her, not urgently, not dramatically, with the specific quality of a man holding something he understands is precious and real. He pressed his face into her locks. She could feel his heart beat through his chest. "I love you," he said. He said it the way he did everything else, unhurriedly, with the full weight of meaning behind it, as something stated rather than performed. She pulled back to look at him. In the north-facing light of his study, with her painting on the wall behind him and his arms around her, he was the most legible thing she'd ever tried to draw, and she understood, for the first time fully, why she'd needed 47 attempts. Not to capture him. To learn how to see that clearly. "I love you too," she said. He kissed her slowly, with the patience of someone who has nowhere to be that matters more than here. She kissed him back with all 47 drawings worth of attention. The study was quiet. The north-facing light moved. The city kept its continuous faith. Part 6. The Record. The work is never really finished. It just finds its right form and stops asking for more. C.B. Chapter 15. A Saturday 8 months later. Riverside Park in mid-February was a different proposition than Riverside Park in May. The trees were their winter selves, honest and architectural. The grass had gone straw. The fountain was off, the basin holding only a thin film of collected rain. Candice came anyway. She always came. She was on the 3rd bench from the east entrance, hers, the one with the iron armrest on the left, and she had her sketchpad and her headphones and Erykah Badu, which felt like the right companion for a winter Saturday when you were thinking about everything at once. The park had that winter morning quality she'd always loved, emptied and frank, the city visible through the bare trees, the light flat and even and without the softening influence of leaves. Everything a little more itself than it was in summer. She was working a new series. Not documentary this time. She'd been spending the fall on something more abstract, shapes and geometries that were still about the body, still about the accumulated evidence of a life, but less about specific faces. Her gallery in Prospect Heights had expressed interest. Her Instagram had more than 40,000 followers now, which she'd had to be talked into looking at by Diane, who considered it a form of responsibility. She was 3 pages into the session when she heard the laugh. She smiled before she looked up. He came across the grass with Earl on his left and Johnny on his right, and Johnny was hanging from his arm with both hands and his feet dragging through the frost-gray grass, and Earl was narrating something with the sustained intensity of a child who has become, in these 8 months, remarkably specific about what his words do. Earl was drawing now, seriously, with the focus of someone who had decided it was a language, and he narrated the way Candice drew, like he was trying to get the true shape of something. Jackson saw her, and the smile became the complete version. She tucked her pencil behind her ear and moved her bag. He sat beside her. Johnny immediately put his head in her lap, which was a development of the last 2 months that still caught her off guard with its completeness. Earl sat on her other side and opened his own sketchpad. Jackson put his arm around her, and she settled into the side of him she'd come to know, the specific warmth and geometry of someone you have chosen completely. "What are you working on?" he asked. She turned the pad so he could see. The new shapes. The abstractions. The language she was still finding. He looked at it with the careful attention that had, over 8 months, never once failed to show up. "It's different from before," he said. "But it's still you. You can hear you in it." "That's what I'm hoping for," she said. Johnny made a small sound from her lap, the sound of a child who has been awake since 6 a.m. and has finally found a location soft enough to reconsider. Earl looked up from his sketchpad. "I'm drawing Uncle Jack's face," he said. "It's hard. He moves." "He does that," Candice agreed. Jackson, who had been looking at her new work, glanced at his nephew. "Let me see," he said. Earl, with the specific dignity of a young artist, turned his pad. The drawing was remarkable, actually. Imprecise in the technical sense, the proportions still finding themselves. But the essential thing was there, the quality of his uncle's face. The warmth. The legibility. Jackson looked at it for a long moment. "You got me," he said. "That's me." "I know," Earl said. Then, with the serene authority of a child who has learned this from a specific source, drawing is mostly looking. Candice laughed, the full version, the one that surprised her. Jackson looked at her with an expression she had drawn many times and still hadn't fully resolved, because some expressions defied resolution. They simply kept being what they were. She picked up her pencil. Page 48. She drew him in the winter light, his arm around her, his nephew asleep across both their laps, his family's sounds around them in the cold frank air of a park that told the truth. She drew herself in the corner of the frame, pencil in hand, paying attention. Epilogue, the archive. There is a wooden flat file in Candice Brown's studio in Prospect Heights, 4th drawer from the bottom, labeled in her cramped left-handed handwriting simply, J. In it, 53 drawings. Graphite on Bristol board, ranging from the small preliminary studies, 3 inches by 4, loose and rapid, the drawings of someone catching a thing before it escapes, to the full-page portraits that came later, when she had more time and more information and a better understanding of what she was actually trying to get at. The first 44 are from before. Before the bark incident. Before the lobby wall. Before the Thursday evenings and the waterfront and the study, and all the accumulated architecture of 2 people building a life in the same direction. The later ones are different. Not better, necessarily. The earlier drawings have an energy of longing that the later ones don't need to carry. But the later ones have something the early ones were reaching toward, the quality of a person seen fully. Not from a distance, not through the soft lens of a stranger across a park, but close up. In morning light and evening light and the specific light of a north-facing study window and the ambient light of a winter Saturday. In all of it, Jackson Dean had seen the drawer once. She'd shown him, because some things deserve to be witnessed by the person they contain. He'd sat on the floor of the studio with the drawings spread around him and been quiet for a long time. Then he'd said, "I didn't know I looked like that." She'd said, "That's because you never had anyone paying this kind of attention." He'd said, looking up at her, "I do now." She'd said, "You do now." The drawer closes. The flat file stands against the studio wall. The west-facing windows are full of the specific afternoon light of a city that keeps going, that holds everyone inside it at once, that witnesses, without judgment, the ordinary miracle of people choosing to stay. Outside, the park is doing whatever the park does. Recording everything. Forgetting nothing. The end. Hood Eloquence, where the streets meet the literature. Thanks for watching, and